This might sound crazy, but people are taking for granted just how good Connor McDavid is on today's edition of Locked On Oilers.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. I want to thank everyone that's making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And on today's show, I was thinking about this morning when I was out for my run. People are giving Connor McDavid a lot of flack for not being his usual sublime self, and I think we have to be very careful when we're talking about how good the best player in the sport is. And today's show is largely rooted in me just wanting to talk about how good Connor McDavid is, because I know we do that from time to time on the show, but I feel like it's been a little while. He's out with an injury right now. Hopefully, in theory, back in a week or so at the most, give him a couple games to ramp back up before the start of the postseason. But so we're going to start with just how we got here. We're going to spend a little bit of time going down memory lane, looking at the resume. Then our second segment, we're going to compare the season McDavid's having right now to other players around the league this year, and why I think a lot of the conjecture about him being underperforming or having a down year is lunacy. And then we'll tie a bow on today's show, making a case why, if there's anybody who deserves the benefit of the doubt, it's the best hockey player in the world. So at the jump here, when you are on this caliber of player, where we're talking Sidney Crosby, we're talking LeBron, we're talking Messi, we're talking prime Lewis Hamilton at Mercedes, we're talking prime Jeff Gordon, we're talking the best of the best for a prolonged, extended period of time. Mike Trout levels of excellence, where the expectation, if the player is healthy, is that they're going to be an MVP candidate. And then the conversation becomes, well, we can't give it to him every year. There are other players who have to be valuable. And that's where McDavid is at in his NHL career now. We have reached Connor McDavid voter fatigue, and Austin Matthews got one. Nathan McKinnon got one. This year, in theory, Leon will get his second, which will be a nice touch for the Oilers at large. Really we talked about this the other day, really kind of solidify Leon's bona fides as one of the 4 or 5 best players of this era of the last 10 years or so. But as for Connor, I know a lot of casual hockey fans, they're not checking in on teams that aren't their team. And I think this is one of the real conundrums we have in sports media, is because everyone is generally pretty siloed until the playoffs, where most people are only watching their own favorite team. They don't really know what's going on around the league. They see certain teams a couple times a year. If you're in the same division, you see them 4 times. If they're in the opposite conference, you only see them twice. And some of that leads to what I would call a casual take. Someone who sees the game, sees the box score, might pull up Hockey Reference, look at the counting stats and say, wow, McDavid's having a down year. He's not going to have nearly as many points as he had last year. And I think a lot of people lose sight of the burden of expectation that's on Connor. And we've discussed this a ton over the last 10 months or so of me doing the show. We're coming up on a year in a few weeks, actually, of me as the host of Locked On Oilers, and we'll do a special episode for that. But for the most part, when we're talking about the best player in a sport, and they are having what, by all accounts, is a good season. If any player has the season McDavid's having right now, everyone's pretty happy with that player. But the expectation is at that fever pitch level, where if he is not the runaway Hart Trophy guy, casual fans and national media people start looking around and going, what's wrong with Connor? What's wrong with Connor? Is something wrong with Connor? And then you go and look at the box score and he's got 80 some odd points, 90 something points in 70 games. What are we talking about here? This is a player who has 1,072 career points in 708 games. the second player since 1987 to win the Conn Smythe on the losing team in the Stanley Cup final. He has led the entire NHL in points 5 times. He has won the Writers' MVP 3 times. He has won the Players' MVP 4 times. He won the Rocket Richard 2 years ago. And we know there's still a lot of miles left on these tires. And generally speaking, these all-time greats in this caliber of player, they age very gracefully. They typically find ways to evolve, to mold their game, and that enables them to have second or even third primes. If you talk about LeBron, if you're a basketball person, LeBron's effectively had 3 primes because he's never really had a physical decline. He's just evolved his game, changed what he's emphasized. And you could say the same thing about Sidney Crosby, where he's not as explosive of a skater anymore. So he has to be more cerebral, more tactile. He has to use his body a little bit more, use leverage to win pucks as opposed to his raw skating ability. And I'm sure as Connor gets older, he will find ways to take over games without that jitterbug step he uses to put defenders in a blender. But make no mistake about it, I know Leon, McKinnon, Kucherov, a couple guys are having better counting stats years than McDavid. Just remember what McDavid's capable of is what I would say to you. And we'll get to it in our third and final segment, but lest we forget how good Connor is. And I know I've said more than once throughout the course of this season, we're waiting for Connor to have one of those 2 points per game runs for a month, 14, 15 games. We're waiting for him to have one of those 25, 30 points in 10 to 15 games months because he's good for 1 or 2 of those every season. And this year it hasn't come together as easily, but I would point out that the Oilers at large are having a harder time scoring this year than in years past. It's largely, in my opinion, my professional opinion, due to a style change. The Oilers are not creating off of the rush as a team nearly as much. Their power play is a nick worse than it was the last 2 or 3 seasons. And I, for one, am really optimistic that all it's going to take is one good run, one good week, and you're going to have Connor with that Terminator stare. And that was my reasoning for why I felt, even coming off of last year, the Oilers were going to be able to be Stanley Cup favorites. Was they had the best player in the world coming off of as devastating a loss as you can possibly imagine. The Oilers were one singular goal away from the greatest comeback in the history of professional sports. If they had come from 3 games down to win in 7 in the championship round, that would have been better than Yankees Red Sox in 2004. That would have been better than the Flyers against the Bruins in 2010, because that was the championship rounds. That is not something that's ever happened in any sport where the team has trailing 3 games to none has come back in the championship round and won the whole thing. That is not something that happens. And the Oilers were that close. They were Brandon Montour getting his stick on Connor McDavid's stick away from at least tying Game 7 and getting to an overtime. And as you saw in the Four Nations, as you've seen over and over again this year in overtime, when you put the Oilers out there in a 3-on-3 or in a sudden death in the case of the Four Nations, Connor McDavid's the guy you want out there with the puck on his stick. We are going to take our first break of today's edition of Locked On Oilers. When we come back, we're going to walk through how perplexing this entire narrative is, because frankly, if any other player in the league is having this season, they're going to be praised unanimously. And Connor does this, and it's, what's wrong with Connor? Is there something wrong? Is he starting his physical decline? He's 28. Let's relax. I'll see you guys in a second on today's edition of Locked On Oilers, where we've got your team covered every day. There is nothing like getting to a game, a concert, or a show, the energy of the crowd, the sound of the game, and maybe even a celebrity sighting. If you want to catch a game in person, Game Time makes getting tickets easier than ever. Game Time's new feature, Game Time Picks, filters out the fluff and shows you only the best deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time scrolling through thousands of listings. I just checked out Game Time because, as you might know, baseball is back. And as a massive baseball fan, I intend on getting to at least 2 games the first full week of baseball. So I will be at Yankees Diamondbacks on Thursday night. And then Sunday, I will be at Mets Blue Jays. I got my tickets for both games through Game Time, where Game Time features a super deal, which gives you the best bang for your buck. And most importantly, my favorite part of the Game Time ticket experience is the peace of mind. You get a view from your seat before you buy. There's no surprise fees at checkout, and they have a lowest price guarantee, which means you can get tickets with total confidence. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Thursday edition of Locked On Oilers. And if you're watching on YouTube, yes, that is a water stain on my sweatshirt, right behind where the microphone is. So if you're watching over on YouTube, you do have that on me. But as for our boy Connor, and if you're listening, Connor, I hope you're getting better soon. We need you, right? And you take as long as you need. Yes, these regular season games are important. We don't want to breed a culture of contentness. We don't want people on the team to feel like we can just turn it on whenever we want, that once we get to the playoffs, we'll be fine, because that's not how sports work. And frankly, that's not how life works. Sure, if you want to reduce this down, you want to break it down to a micro level and say, well, if I want to get in shape, I'm going to start running. Okay, well, you got to start running one day at a time and accumulate and build it up over time. You can't run a marathon cold. I'm sure if you are of reasonable physical condition and exercise regularly, you could limp through a marathon, but you would be in deep trouble by the 10th or 11th mile, because that's where your shin splints would kick in. You would be dehydrated. You wouldn't know that you need the supplies you need along the way. You wouldn't have electrolytes. You wouldn't be able to rehydrate, and might be able to get there. There'd be a lot of walking, but that's the way the hockey season works. And I've made this comparison a ton of times, but the NHL season is a marathon. We are talking about guys who show up second week of September for informal skates, dinner with the guys, reintegrating yourself back into the routine, preseason testing. If we want to say the second week of September, you have half of September, October, November, December, January, February, March, April, and that's just to get to the playoffs. We're talking effectively 7 months, 7 full months to get to the NHL playoffs, if you want to say half of April, half of September. And that's just to get in the door. Then you have the second half of April, which we accounted before. You have the entirety of May, and you have the first 2 to 3 weeks of June. If you are not doing your marathon training during the course of those 8 months, you are going to be in deep doo-doo when you get to race day, because you have not put the work in. And sure, you might be able to get through on your innate physical ability and some grit, but you are not going to do well. You are not going to feel good doing it, and you are going to feel atrocious after doing it. So that's my word of caution. If you're the Oilers, if you're the Jets, who are in a bit of a weird funk right now, if you're one of these teams that's been locked into a playoff spot for several months now, and you really haven't had your feet held to the fire in a minute, the next week and a half is really your last best chance as a tune-up, because that first 5 minutes of a playoff game, of the first round, of the first series, the opening round, it's kind of like riding a motorcycle downhill, where if you get going too fast, eventually you're going to go end over end because you have too much going forward, and you come out with a little too much juice and you play yourself out of the game because you're a little too ramped up. It really is important that you play within yourself. And I know there's a lot of conjecture going on. I forget whose column I was reading on Wednesday afternoon after my run. I was sitting down out on my deck, and on my phone I was skimming through a bunch of articles I had bookmarked when I first woke up, and someone had mentioned very loosely that the Oilers will probably be fine. They have more than enough talent. They're going to get a familiar first-round opponent. And you never want to say anyone's holding anything back. But like we talked about on yesterday's show, there is some hope that the Oilers are holding something back, not because you want them to, but because of what we discussed several points throughout the course of this regular season. The idea that last year went so late. That playoff series against the Panthers didn't end till almost the last week of June, almost July, and you didn't get a full offseason. You had a lot of activities in the case of Connor McDavid, who got married over the summer, and because of that, you didn't get your full recovery. And these guys, they know their bodies very well, but some of these experiences, that's the first time Connor's played through the end of June and didn't get a full off season, didn't get a ton of dial down. You know, he didn't get a ton of R&R and ability to really unwind and decompress and get away from hockey. He was busy. And look, the greats like him, they're not going to make excuses. They're just going to say they need to work harder. And I commend his ability and his dedication to being that locked in. The rest of us, we all could strive for that level of competitiveness because it would make us a lot better in our day-to-day lives. But as far as Connor's season, we are talking about a player who has 90 points in 63 games. If you didn't know, right now the NHL points leader has, I want to say it's 105. No, it's 111. So again, Nikita Kucherov, who's leading the NHL in points right now, has 111. Connor McDavid has 90. Yeah, that sounds like a big drop off, but a down year for Connor McDavid is 6th in points. 6th in points is a down year. And if other teams could afford their best player having that type of 30-point statistical drop-off year over year and still have a good year, a lot of teams would sign up for that. And I know there's a really good one-to-one example, actually, in Artemi Panarin of the Rangers, who the Rangers are having a down year as a team, and he's still going to finish in the ballpark of 90 points. He's still going to have a really good counting. He's at 79 points. He's got 10 games to go, Panarin. So non-zero chance he can get to that 90-point threshold in 70 games, which would be like a 30-something, 40-something point drop-off from last year. But that's still good. 90 points is still good. And McDavid, should he come back, he should be able to pot a couple more. But I think the conjecture about him having a bad or a down year is lunacy, because we're talking about somebody who's consistently been the best player in the world for 5 years now, at least 5 years. If you want to go earlier than that, I would hear the argument. But at the very least, McDavid's been the best player in the world for 5, maybe 6 years. And if anyone is entitled to the benefit of the doubt that they're going to be able to hyper-focus and lock in, it is Connor McDavid. And that's going to be our subject in the next segment. So be sure to stick around to this edition of Locked On Oilers, where we've got your team covered every day. The Final Four of the NCAA tournament is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. We have 4 number 1 seeds in the Final Four. It's Houston, Auburn. I wrote this down. It's Houston, Auburn, Florida, and Duke. So we got 4 number 1 seeds in the Final Four for the first time in quite a while. Any of these teams can pull this out. And with 3 games left, you got 2 Final Four games in the national title game. There's tons of exciting action to get in on. The FanDuel app is simple and easy to use. And when I win, you get paid out instantly, no waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. And just for context, yes, we do have a bracket a physical bracket on my dry erase board. That's what I was looking at, not down at a note sheet. Just wanted that on the record. And thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Thursday edition of Locked On Oilers as we approach the horizon of the weekend. And the Oilers are getting to the home stretch. As we sit here today, the Oilers have 8 regular season games remaining. They are 2 points back of second place, the Kings. They're going to get to play the Kings in the next week and change. They're going to get to play the Ducks a couple times. They're going to get to play the Sharks a couple times. And the Blues are in there as well. And I don't know when the Oilers anticipate Connor being available. I know there's been a little bit of conjecture as far as Trent Frederic because he's not that far away coming back from that ankle injury. And real quick on Trent Frederic, I know this is a McDavid episode, but I did want to make this point. If Trent Frederic can't go until the playoffs and the Oilers aren't able to agree to an extension with him, really not a great trade. Just the mechanics and the optics of trading assets for a guy who only is going to play in the playoffs. It'd be one thing if they knew he wasn't going to be able to play until the playoffs, but to get him in the building and then realize he's a little bit further back in his recovery than he was, not the best look as far as asset management and player management. And then real quick, Evander Kane, we're expecting him start of the playoffs, if then, and Stuart Skinner probably a week or so away from returning, but Connor most pressing. Matthias Ekholm, of course, is pressing, but he's closer than any of the three. As for McDavid, he's had the 2 injuries, keep him out of the lineup. He had the ankle way back earlier in the season. He got suspended for that cross-check on Connor Garland, and then this injury pop up as well. And this is a player who's been remarkably healthy throughout his NHL career. For the most part, Connor's never really had a serious injury. You know, he had the collarbone in 2015-16 as a rookie, and he played 82 games, 78, 64 in 1920, where he missed two stretches of games over the course of that season that kept him out. And that season wasn't 82 games. It was truncated because of the pandemic. So he only really missed like 7 or 8 as opposed to 18. The year after, he plays every game. The year after, he plays 80 of 82. The year after that, he plays 82 out of 82. Last year, they held him out of a few games down the backstretch, and he was hurt at the start of the season as well. This year, as we said before, he's missed a few games for injury and then the 3 games for the suspension for the hit on Connor Garland, and he's still at 90 points. This is a guy who would tell you he hasn't been that healthy, who's been a little nicked up, and he's still within shouting distance of 100 points. And there are degrees to this conversation. It's something I talk about with Haley Simon of Locked On Blues a lot because she likes to give me flack for saying I don't take the Blues seriously enough. Sure, we can talk about the Blues as a playoff team the same way we can talk about how McDavid's having a great season counting stats-wise. But there's the counterpoint to that you know he's capable of more. So why isn't he doing it? We have a little bit more direct evidence in this case where we're talking about injuries and a suspension and a nagging, lingering injury at that, something that's probably sapped him of some of his burst and some of his agility. And in spite of that, he is still having a tremendous counting stat season and a very efficient underlying number season as well. If anything, Connor's been a victim of some bad luck in terms of shooting luck and in terms of goaltending. And his goal split since the start of February at 5-on-5 is not great. And that's largely a product of the goaltending being so substandard. But for the most part here, if the Oilers are going to do anything of note come playoff time. We talked about gym class theory the other day. If the Oilers are going to do anything of note come playoff time, they are going to need Connor and Leon as locked in as humanly possible because no team is expecting as much from their 2 best players than the Oilers are of Connor and Leon. Because you look at these minutes allocations where we're talking 22, 21 minutes a night for those 2. Nugent-Hopkins are usually around 20. Bouchard and Ekholm are over 20. And then you get to a real drop-off and then another drop-off. And the Oilers have some decisions to make as far as the lineup. Frankly, that's probably what we'll talk about on tomorrow's show. But I want to see the Oilers start to put it together, and I want to see the narrative about McDavid having a bad year squashed, because this is lunacy. He has the sixth most points of any player in the entire NHL this season. And people are talking about him like he's a leper. People are talking about him like he's under a point per game. And I know there's a really high expectation on Connor. He has been consistently over 1.5 per game for the last handful of seasons. He was at 1.5 points per game in 2021, 1.86 2 years ago, 1.74 last year, and 1.42 points per game this year. That is still an insanely high rate of offense. It's just that Oiler fans and some of the more casual fans are used to Connor sniffing that 120, 130 point threshold, and to see him under 100, and even with the games he's missed, is a bit jarring for some people. And I like to say pressure is a privilege. If you are good at something, people expect something from you, and you have an obligation to live up to that, especially when we're talking about the sports world, when we're talking about talent and what you have, because certain guys, and I think this is something that's really hit me as I've gotten older, is a lot of us have to work really hard to be good at something. And for some people, they get a bit of a head start. They have genetic advantages. They're bigger, they're taller, they're stronger, they're faster. And some of us, to just make do, have to work extremely hard to be average in those capacities. And when you are as physically gifted as Connor is, as Sidney Crosby is, and I think I draw a line with those two in specific because of their dedication, because of their commitment to what it means to be that good. You think about the one-track mind, and you think about McDavid asking his parents to write Sidney Crosby a letter about how he deals with expectation when Connor was 5 years old and Sidney Crosby was 15. Connor has spent his entire life living up to that ideal of what it means to be the great Canadian hockey player. And it means a lot to him. And at this point in his career, I think he would tell you he would trade the regular season stats for a good playoffs. I think a lot of the players on that tier, they have the individual awards. He's got the gold from the Four Nations representing Canada. He got to play with Sid and Nate, which was really cool. But there's one thing left on his list, and it's the best trophy in all of sports. It's almost 40 pounds. It's weightless when you put it over your head. And if Connor and the Oilers are going to get it done this year, they are going to need him to be at full strength as he can be, and he's going to need to be as recovered as can be. And that means the margin for error upon his return is probably going to be pretty small. And we'll leave you with that thought as we wrap up today's show. If he only gets 4, 5 of the final 8 regular season games as his tune-up, is that going to be enough for him to be ramped up and ready to go for the playoffs? Like we talked about, we got to do our marathon training. We start at 3 miles a day. Then we add half a mile. We add another half mile. And we keep adding a half mile per week or every other week, depending on how we're taking to it from both a pace and from a cardio standpoint. But the Oilers have the capacity to do this. We did our optimism episode last week, and I'll reiterate it now. The Oilers, on paper, have as talented a forward group as any team in the NHL 1 through 12. They are going to have a great luxury of playing someone like a Corey Perry who's going to have 15 goals on the fourth line. You can get away with playing an Adam Henrique or a Matthias Janmark on the fourth line. You have Frederick and Evander Kane you're going to get to drop into this group. You don't know how it's all going to fit together, but you know if everything breaks right for you, you are going to have a very good forward group. You are going to have a really solid 1 through 4 on your defense, and frankly, I think 5, because I think Brett Kulak is one of the better number 5D in the entire NHL. And then at that point, it's really just a matter of, does our goaltending not lose us the game? But that will do it for today's edition of Locked On Oilers. Thank you so much to everybody who made Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. If you could please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts or over on YouTube, that would be amazing. And go check out Locked On NHL, covering all of the biggest stories across the league with the local expertise of Locked On. Today, Hunter Hodes and I are going to talk about the games last night, the Leafs and the Panthers, the Hurricanes and the Capitals, the Rangers and the Wild. It was a good hockey night on Wednesday, so go be sure to check that out. I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Until then, let's go Oilers.